You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. I'm teaming up with Retail Gazette and Zebra Technologies on July 16th for a webinar about frontline tech. We're going to be looking at how technology can deliver real-time answers in store, how it can boost morale and retention, something that's so important in retail right now, how it can improve store execution, and also, crucially, how it can future-proof frontline operations. It should be a really lively discussion, so I hope you can join us. You can register via the link in the show notes. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Retail Disrupted. I'm joined today by Camille Van Horne, who's the co-founder and CEO of Highstock. Highstock is a B2B marketplace that connects big brands with unsold inventory to high-quality global wholesale buyers. Camille was previously a director of product at Instacart, where she led the roadmap of new logistics capabilities for retailers and CPGs. She joined Instacart before the pandemic and over her 6-year tenure wore multiple hats, including Instacart's investments in fulfillment innovation and robotics and payments. Camille holds a BA from the University of Chicago and an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Camille, it's so great to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Natalie. Happy to be here.
I'm really excited to have you here, and I can't wait to hear all about Highstock because you're shaking things up in the liquidation space in a big way. Highstock has been called the eBay for discount inventory. It's a brand new venture, and I'd love to start right there, Camille. Tell us a little bit more about the platform and how it works.
Of course. And maybe I'll just start from the beginning. So my co-founder and I were at Instacart ideating for a period around different ways in which we can essentially apply like our learnings from Instacart around moving product from point A to point B to bigger problems at a global scale. And throughout my career, I've spent my entire career, 15 years in consumer, and at every step of the way, I identified situations in which we were dealing with inventory that was misallocated and not being productive towards the business. On the flip side, like when I was at Sears Holdings, which owned Kmart and a number of discount retailers, I would see a demand for branded product at lower pricing. And this was actually a problem for the business at the time because we weren't able to generate margin on product that we felt like we should be able to. And so combining those two insights is what led us to build Highstock. Highstock is a B2B marketplace. What we do is we connect brands predominantly in the personal care and beauty industry to great wholesale buyers that are out of market and won't disrupt the brand's core business.
Interesting. And excess inventory is, of course, a major problem. No retailer brand wants to be left with stuff that didn't sell. There are existing solutions for retailers or brands that have this issue of unsold goods. We have off-price retailers like TJ Maxx or Nordstrom Rack. There are brokers. There's also manual liquidation processes. What are you doing at Highstock that others aren't?
What we do is we really put the power position in the hands of the brand. And so today, if a brand is approaching a TJ Maxx or a Ross, they're actually coming in on their back foot because Ross and TJ's know that they're in a position of excess inventory. And so that becomes a negotiation lever against price. And so what we're doing is creating a platform where all kinds of different bidders can engage with the product. And the brand then has a say as to whether they'd like to allocate it to an importer in Chile who will purchase all the units, a buyer at TJ Maxx who will purchase a subset at maybe a slightly better price, or a subscription box in Canada that caters to potentially new customers in a market that they haven't touched before. So it becomes, I would say, like really a way for brands to evaluate their options up against recovery of cost as well as brand preservation.
So that's really interesting. I guess giving them a little bit more control over what they do with those unsold goods. I want to talk about off price channels in a little bit more detail. They do serve a purpose, but I think they can be brand diluting. And again, not to pick on TJ Maxx, but I was in TK Maxx, as it's called here. I don't know why it's TK and not TJ, but yeah, it's TK Maxx here in the UK. And I was just trying to buy some hand soap, and I was surprised by how many premium brands were in that category. So Molton Brown, Crabtree and Evelyn, L'Occitane, there were a whole ton of premium brands. And overall, I think it's an attractive option for brands when it comes to reaching new customers, but there's always this element of risk for a brand to move into off price. High stock is different because you're a private marketplace. And does this kind of privacy or secrecy, does this has this helped you to attract more sellers?
Yes, certainly. So we work with I can't disclose the names of some of our customers, but we work with extremely premium brands on this problem. And the way that they see the value of high stock is actually historically the competition was less for us off price, and it's actually destruction. So we become an alternative to destroying products for these prestige brands. And so that means it's a way for them to recover cash. So transform inventory that is sitting in warehouses into liquidity so that they can invest in more brand accretive areas of the business. And then, in addition to that, it's a way for them to avoid destruction cost. And destruction is not just bad for the environment; it's actually bad for a brand's P&L too. And so, what we do is we provide these players much better options than what existed for them previously, because they were not, I would say, exploring TJ Maxx very intently. And many of the brands that we work with actually prefer that we not engage with TJ Maxx because they think it hurts their momentum as they attempt to grow.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners would be interested in learning a little bit more about the destruction side of things. So what actually happens?
Yeah, it's a very secretive practice. Like if you speak to folks on like the brand or um, I would say like the marketing side of the house, they would have no idea that this is happening. And so
Yeah.
even within these large organizations, there's a lot of secrecy around the practice of destruction. But the reality is it happens with almost every brand will have a state in which, especially brands that have any type of short dated inventory, what that means is inventory that's approaching expiration. And usually, like what will happen in these cases is that the finance team, the operations team will make a decision, take a write off. And then the warehouse will take advantage or will essentially like do the deed using a set of companies that they have on hand to actually perform the destruction. So it's usually not a very obviously sexy part of the sort of general experience of building a brand, but it's very common.
Yeah, and you talked about expiration dates, and you mentioned at the start that you're working with beauty and personal care brands, which I guess is a natural sort of transition for you, having come from Instacart and worked on grocery. Are there any other verticals that you have your eye on for the future?
Yes. So where we've been, I would say, most performant is in sort of generally the middle tier of brand that isn't maybe a conglomerate or part of a conglomerate, but has enough distribution to have meaningful inventory that can be moved. And so generally the way that we think about this marketplace is that we want to be experts in a category. Personal care, beauty, fragrances is our expertise, but we do intend to move into other categories. I mean, the crown jewel of this industry is ready to wear, is just the truth. And so over time, just because of the seasonality of it, the fact that there's just so much waste in that category, and so that's likely where we will end up. But my assumption is that we will cover cross category in the next handful of years.
There was an article in Fortune saying that the typical transaction on your platform is $20,000, and about half of your transactions are with buyers outside the US. So I'd love to explore the international angle here. And aside from the main goal, which of course is to clear stock, are there any additional benefits to reaching customers in these new markets?
That's a really good question, and it's something that we discuss a lot with our brands. And the answer is yes. When we do move products internationally, it's very rare that it's going to be in like a very like elegant channel. We do partner with like some really interesting I would say, like alternative channels, like live selling groups, and maybe some e-com internationally. So that becomes maybe a little bit more of a soft landing. But what it does is it primes the market around a brand and kind of juices up the customer base before a brand actually attempts to make their entry into that market. And that is very attractive to brands.
Camille, I have to ask you about tariffs and all the uncertainty that we're seeing in the market right now. How has this impacted your business?
So when we sort of got a pulse on tariffs, or first sort of realized that this was happening just as we were kicking off High Stock, there was certainly like some concern, but we've actually found that the tariff situation has been positive for High Stock in the sense that suppliers are sitting on a lot of inventory. They tried to basically like get to a place where they were acting before tariffs fully hit, and so we actually believe that the fact that suppliers have so much inventory in market is going to be a boon for us, because whenever you have a dislocation in supply and demand, it means that a solution like high stock really comes in handy. And one other note is that you mentioned this, Natalie, we predominantly export. And so what is great about that motion is that unless there are like significant retaliatory tariffs, we are actually moving in the right direction. Like the flow of goods is not up against tariffs. And then maybe the final point here that many people don't appreciate is that tariffs are placed on the value of the goods. So we sell at very low discounted wholesale prices. And so that actually is also positive because we're in this like off price space that tends to be recession proof. And that tariffs are also applied based on the country of origin of products. And because we're in beauty and personal care, it is pretty rare actually that country of origin is China or any of the really hard hit countries in this macro economy. And so that is also a benefit that we essentially get as a byproduct of being in this category.
Definitely a silver lining there. That's really interesting. Now, Camille, you've scaled marketplaces. You know how to solve complex logistics challenges. How has your experience at Instacart shaped what you're doing at Highstock? And I guess your co-founder Ashish as well, because he's also ex Instacart.
I think you need the logistics DNA to build this type of business. It's incredibly complex. And um, first off, we're dealing with inventory that isn't going to be as well cataloged as as it would be if it were sort of right off the shelf. And so what that is very akin to is actually at Instacart, we were dealing with situations if we didn't own the inventory, and we were dealing with, grocers that had a very dynamic situation in the store. And we came up with all kinds of really thoughtful in-product ways to accommodate replacements and accommodate out of stocks and accommodate all kinds of different needs on our buyer side. And that is actually very much the case in the context of what we do with surplus inventory, where we are basically dealing with brands that don't have a good catalog on product, and we're creating affordances in product for our bulk buyers to be able to select replacements and actually be able to ensure that they're able to satisfy their end customer on their side. So lots of learnings at a much larger scale. We're doing truckloads here versus, just I would say like a handful of brown grocery bags. But a lot of the key primitives apply in both circumstances.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably a little bit easier when you're not dealing with perishable items as well. So, yeah, so interesting. I don't think I can record an episode these days without mentioning AI. How are you using AI and machine learning in your business?
I would say it touches almost every part of our day to day. So first off, I think that like being a company in this age, you need to be like thinking AI first. And so all of our outreach, the way that we code, everything is like assisted by AI today. And then as we think about the product, in general, the way that I've thought about building product and companies is that you always want to solve a problem. And we're very much at this stage where we are solving the problem for brands that have too much inventory. And so that has been like the centrifugal force around high stock. And areas in which we've started to apply AI is in ways in which we can basically like transcribe restrictions, appraise inventory, and that type of assistance to brands trying to make some really hard decisions, something that we believe is going to be critical to growth and critical to like the velocity that we need around these transactions.
Now, you've had some amazing traction. You've raised over $5 million dollars from Greylock Partners and Instacart co founder Max Mullen. You've seen incredible growth in the first half of the year. When did you actually start? Was it the end of last year?
It was at the end of last year,
Okay.
and we had been dabbling, but I would say like Highstock really came to be in September of last year, and so we've had like just a few months under our belt, and it's been amazing. Like the growth has been like truly unbelievable. We've like 10x in the last 6 months since the beginning of the year, so lots of engagement on both sides of the house, and that I would say is like very much. I'm excited for like a continuation of that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, because it's still very early days, but I was wondering if you could just expand on your vision for the company and how you would like to see it evolve over the next few years.
We want to predominantly support, and this is something that has become more clear to me like in the last few months, the buyer partners too. And these buyer partners actually are like really not tech oriented at all, but they're increasingly open to technology because a lot of what they do day in day out is really hard, like under like assessing inventory, assessing ways to sell the inventory, managing cash flow. um, these are areas that are truly unsolved for the space of trading and distribution. And I increasingly believe that over time we will become that marketplace for all of these different entities to play. But one of the major wedges that we'll have is essentially providing these end players with like the support that they need on payments, customs, and regulation for international, so that they can operate less in a gray space and essentially more in a space where they have the toolkit to be successful in this digital age.
And I guess in order to get there, what kind of culture do you need? What do you look for when you're hiring?
That's also a really good question. Because I do believe team and culture is everything. I used to really believe in like education, and that has been stripped away in the sense that I actually believe that the people who are most successful at Highstock are folks who are really hungry, like really want to see basically like success and are outcome oriented and will do anything to make things happen. We get a lot of no's in our industry. And so being able to blast through no's and like really disrupt is something that I look for in talent. And then I think in addition to that, one really needs to love the ambiguity of starting a business in a space that's always been pen and paper. And that's actually one of the things I'm most proud of, is that we've been able to essentially build a product that took transactions that had always been spreadsheet based to being actually like technology based. And that ability to create like structured data out of like pretty much nothing. Actually, our first order was on like literally a post-it. That you know, like a
Wow.
post-it and actually transform it into like a digital experience is huge.
Yeah, that's progress.
Yeah, and that's what real progress. So,
Yeah.
having folks who can enjoy those small moments and like think really big, is what I aspire to doing in the team.
Oh, that's so interesting because I speak to a lot of leaders and founders on the podcast, and curiosity comes up a lot, just to reiterate your point around, having that hunger and that interest and that kind of intellectual curiosity, I think is key. Now, before I let you go, I want to get your thoughts on grocery e-commerce. I had a very interesting meeting with Amazon's grocery team in Seattle last month, and my main takeaway was that online grocery is still a work in progress. There's still a lot of experimentation, and I'm personally really interested to see whether AI is going to drive this new wave of adoption as we look to the next few years. I think the pandemic did, it got us somewhere, but I think as soon as we could, we went back to physical stores. With your experience at Instacart, I would love to get your take on grocery commerce and how you see this playing out.
It's interesting that you say that this was just like a wave around COVID, grocery e-commerce, because I do actually believe that for major segments of the population, and predominantly actually women, working women, grocery e-commerce is like the biggest time saver possible. And so I was always really excited about us being, while I was at Instacart, an essential service during the pandemic. But as we return to normal life, that angle of supporting women who have limited amounts of time and who predominantly were responsible for the collection of groceries ended up being like an area that I found to be very, very special about the work we were doing at Instacart. And certainly there's a lot of experimentation. We did a ton of work on robotics that didn't even pan out, largely because the reality is that the economics don't work in robotics when it comes to fulfillment yet in the grocery space. I would say that the biggest areas of innovation for grocery are probably going to be around inventory management. That to me is like so untapped. Grocery stores are so bad at that. Instacart was also really bad at that, for the record. And so if I were to think about ways in which AI can support grocery, it would be in that space, as well as likely the ordering process itself. Like it would be very cool to just be able to tell my agent to just blast through and order me groceries.
Camille, it's been so great to have you on the show. Thank you for your time and for sharing your insights.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.